Thanks, Peter and Peter. I'll just very briefly I presume most of you are familiar with Coillte. We're not just trees, we are involved in many other activities. To echo what was Peter just saying at the very end, but our core purpose is now the innovative and sustainable management of natural resources. Our main focus we've three main business activities. One is the more traditional forest activity, which is the management of the forest business. We've two large panel processing mills. That's our panel products business. And in Coillte Enterprise, we have a range of diverse activities, very much supporting the climate change kind of agenda through renewable energy, especially in wind and biomass. So they're big activities for us now. And we're very much concerned about looking for a focus on innovation within all those activities. And we see the benefits that can come from that. One of the key parts of that overall strategy is carbon, and that's what I'll talk about today. In my presentation, what I'll do is I'll try and cover off, first of all, from a national perspective, what the importance of forestry is to Ireland in meeting the climate change challenges. And then the second half is to introduce a potential solution to how we might make more of that in the Irish context. To start off, forestry is already a very important part of our climate change agenda. These graphs are taken from the latest EPA forecasts out to 2020. And the chart on the left shows in the black bar our two emission scenarios, and the green bar is what we're allowed. And the difference between the two is the distance to target. And on the right-hand side, we're focusing just on that gap, that distance to target. And you'll see that one is about 12.5 million tonnes, and this is in 2020 forecast. And in the other scenario, it's around about 7.5 million. The green part of that is the contribution that forestry will make to that distance to target. Okay, so it's between 40 and 60% of that distance to target. So Peter was saying that there's still an outstanding issue of whether forestry will be included post-2012. That has massive implications for Ireland. If we don't have it, we have a much higher hurdle to climb. It means we will have to either have reductions in emissions or energy saving within the country, or we have to go out and buy more credits. So forestry is very important in the climate change context, and we have been planting quite significant amounts up to the mid-90s. But since then, we have declined significantly since there. This chart shows that level of planting over the last number of years. You'll see that the green bar is the public planting, Coiltte's involvement in that, and the blue bar is private planting. Under the National Climate Change Strategy, the target was to be planting around about 15,000 hectares per year. We're currently planting around about half of that. Coillte, because it's no longer eligible for premium payments, finds it uneconomic to be involved in the afforestation activity. So all of that target is left to the private sector to fulfill. And as you see, the kind of general trend is that we're planting about half of what we should be planting. This has very long-term implications. This chart shows what the carbon sequestration value of our forests are over two scenarios. One is if we continue to plant around about the 7,500 hectares per year. That's the red line. And if we bring it up to our target of around about 16,000 hectares, that's the green line. What's very important here is that you'll see, this doesn't point, but you'll see that around about 2020, we're getting up into the realms of over 4 million tonnes positive carbon sink value from forestry in that time frame. Okay, stay on the red line. If we keep at that level of planting, that continues to grow as the age structure of the forest begin to mature. But then as they're harvested, because of our fall off in the level of planting over the recent years, we don't have enough stock of new planting to replace that removal. So what we're faced with at the time when we most need to hit our biggest targets, the -80 in the 2050 context, that's when forestry starts to drop off. So the blue dotted line shows what we've kind of been used to, the positive contribution from forestry over time. Then we're seeing with the drop off and because of the level of planting, we've a gaping hole that we have to fill at the time when we most need it. And that calculates roughly around about 45 million tonnes between 2035 and 2050. So that has to be replaced by either purchases abroad or other initiatives to ensure that there's emissions reduction within Ireland. And obviously, you know, current carbon prices are around about the 15 euros a tonne. The figure for that, no one's quite sure exactly what the price is going to be, but it's going to be a very, very significant figure. So while we have very important, or while forestry is very important for climate change, we're not doing the most we can. So it's key really that we have to bring those afforestation levels back up to around about the 15,000 hectare level to ensure that we have a sustainable, positive contribution from the carbon perspective, but also from the output of that forest is also going to fuel things like biomass into the renewable energy sector. Ireland has very low forest cover by international standards. We're around about 10% forest cover at the moment. The EU average is 36, 37%. So we're well under a third at the moment. And what we believe is that carbon could be the catalyst to unlock the potential that we have here and provide an alternative alongside the current funding schemes, just a different mechanism to try and support that so that we don't have a focus purely on the current scheme to deliver our 15,000 hectares, that we have a broader range of initiatives that will be able to address some of the market inhibitors that are there. So how could we open up this revenue stream? Well, this is very quickly how the calculation works. We have, in all sectors of the economy, we calculate what the emissions are, and that's our total national emissions. Against that, we have eligible forests. Post-1990 is the cut-off year, and those get netted off our total emissions, and that gives us our net greenhouse balance. And what we do then is we have our allowances that we're allowed under Coillte and whatever other arrangements are there, and that gives us our distance to target. And we then have to match that with purchases of international credit. So there's three main areas where we can address the climate change issue. One is to ensure that our emissions are as low as possible through efficiency and other measures. The second is to try and increase the level of carbon sinks that are there. And the third is to make the financial purchase of carbon credits as efficient as possible. The current position is that forests are planted primarily for timber value. But the timber value is, in Irish context, around a 40-year rotation. So that there's a market failure there in order to get people to invest in that. So government steps in with grants and premiums to encourage people to plant in the short term. Those premiums are in existence for about 20 years or so, and then the timber revenues come back into the landowner. Almost as a byproduct of that process, the government is able to use the Coillte units that are generated through the removals. They're termed RMUs, and government can use that against national targets. But there's no current direct link between the grants and premiums and the actual level of units. A possibility now is opened up because carbon now has a value, a financial value, is that right from day one, a forest has a potential to have revenues flowing in the early years of the rotation and not just at the very end. So the market failure that needed government intervention could be eroded by having a carbon value associated with it. This graph shows a two rotations model. You'll see that the graph kind of spikes a little bit on the way up. That's just through thinnings activities where you're taking out material that would go into the biofuel kind of section or sector. And reaching the top then is when the harvest, you would harvest the forest. Under current rules, that curve would show a straight line drop off, because the view is that it is all oxidized immediately out into the atmosphere. But in reality, through the negotiations on harvested wood products, the current proposals is that will be released more slowly over time. So as wood products make furniture and are involved in building of houses, etc., building products, that carbon is stored for a longer period of time, which is very important from the context of the carbon value. So effectively what can happen is that somewhere between the peak and the trough is the kind of equilibrium level of what a forest can contribute. So the concept we're looking to develop is that there is a forestry unit that is created associated with the planting of that forest on a national basis. Government, depending on the level of prices in the carbon market, may need to be involved or may not. On current kind of pricing levels, it would look as if the premium payments could be replaced purely by the carbon value. So it might mean that establishment grants might still be there, but as prices rise, you'd expect that to also to fall away. But because of the structure of this, effectively you're now opening up a revenue stream. So the owner of a forest with carbon is now selling a carbon product. It's not, and so it's a matter of selling that rather than being eligible for a grant. So it opens up a whole range of different possibilities in terms of how you might package that. So one of the things that is attractive there is that it's a very flexible type of product. You could have pension funds who are interested in getting involved in the sector, who might want a very safe, predictable kind of return, might always want government to buy those units, and that would be packaged up as a particular type of product. Other investors might see, well, there's a very significant carbon upside and they want to be involved in it from that perspective. So rather than a one-size-fits-all grant and premium scheme, this would be in addition to that would attract a broader range of participants. And the way it would work is that government, as a buyer of carbon, would have the opportunity to buy those forest units. It would support it probably only to the extent of establishment grant. And if this increases the level of overall carbon sink, then that displaces the amount of money that would have been used to purchase carbon credits abroad. So it's effectively ensuring that that investment is staying within the country. And it's would have all the non-carbon benefits as well associated with supporting increased level of raw material that would go into the wood processing sector, as well as the biomass for energy sector. If government, for whatever reason, decides not to buy that carbon unit, investors will want to see that there is another market for that. And similar to the initiative that is done in New Zealand, they convert those into those RMUs into AAUs, which is internationally tradable. So government would then allow the holder of the forest credit to translate that into a different type of unit that then can be sold internationally. So investors are confident that they will always have a market for that. So the key attributes of the scheme is that it's not a replacement of the current schemes. They should progress and do the good work that they're doing at the moment. But as we've seen over the last number of years, it's really only delivering half of the amount of afforestation that we want. So what this would do is it would be in addition to that, a different mechanism to attract a different set of investors and participants within the market. It's primarily a revenue-based scheme rather than a government support scheme. Very important distinction. And also very important is that there's a direct link in terms of how you manage the forest and its carbon output with the incentives. So you're trying to manage it from a carbon perspective as well as from a timber perspective. Obviously, these would still be managed as commercial forests because from a carbon perspective, you will get better benefits by growing, harvesting, locking it up in harvested wood products, as well as displacing fossil fuels, and then starting the cycle again. You always get this equilibrium position that's achieved. Obviously, from a landowner the main carbon benefit is in the early stages, the first rotation of that, but that's the time that you need to have the incentives in place. So the important distinction between this and the current schemes is that it's much more open to other participants. You don't have to have the eligibility criteria. It's just a product you're trying to sell. And as long as the system is allowed to work, that a unit can be traded, well then it should be a separate and additional incentive to try and increase the level of afforestation. In terms of policy, if you look at our target is to achieve 17% forest cover. We're currently at 10%, EU average is 36. So that target is moving us from a third to a half of what the current EU average is. If we planted our current levels, it'll take us 60 years to reach that 17%. And it's a massive opportunity for us, so we're going too slowly on it. If you look at the green line there, if we plant 15,000 hectares per year, we'll hit it around about 2040 or so, much more acceptable time frame. So we really have a huge opportunity, so we should try and make the most of it, and we're certainly not planting the kind of level that we should be at the moment. In terms of where forestry fits, I think it resonates in several policy areas. Obviously, it's a major contributor at the moment and can be in the future to climate change mitigation. It can reduce the level of international purchase of carbon credits and making sure that we invest domestically. What I forgot to mention was when if forest carbon units are traded internationally, effectively that becomes foreign direct investment into the forestry sector in Ireland, because you're trading that unit internationally and the funds flow come in to support the sector. We've never had an opportunity to do that before. It supports our target to hit 17% forest cover. It creates jobs and profits in three distinct areas of the economy: the forest sector itself, the wood processing sector, and it supports the renewable energy sector in alleviating some of the supply concerns that people might have in terms of switching over to biomass solutions. And it also supports the movement to the transition to a low carbon economy by having a greater amount of domestically produced, environmentally friendly products. And some of the initiatives that are developing around some of the use of that raw material from not just products, but also from building products, but also in terms of biorefinery, replacement of fossil fuels, and also some petroleum-based chemicals is very interesting. And if we have a bigger stock of that, we're much more of a player in that space. So, in conclusion, forestry is very important, but we're not doing enough in terms of the level of planting, and we need to bring it up to the 15,000 hectares per year. If we do manage to reach that level, there's a whole range of other policy benefits that will accrue. And we believe that by a fairly subtle change in terms of how we address our incentives, that carbon can unlock the potential to attract a much broader range of participants into the sector and also promote domestic economic activity as well. So, thank you very much.